Let's go across to China, where celebrations are on and lavish events are being hosted to mark 70 years of communist rule. It has been 70 years since the founding of the People's Republic of China. On 1st October 1949, Chairman Mao announced the formation of the PRC, or the People's Republic of China, after communist forces won a bloody civil war. And since then, China is celebrating developing at an extraordinary pace with, in fact, Beijing soon will be hosting one of the biggest military parades ever, with President Xi Jinping expected to speak a little later. But these celebrations, which will begin soon, risk being overshadowed by the ongoing protest in Hong Kong, where thousands of people are expected to take to the streets to protest against what they say is increasing control by Beijing over the territory's society and politics. The parade is expected in Tiananmen Square in central Beijing, and will be among the biggest China has ever staged, involving around 15,000 troops and a display of the nation's newest military technology. And these are live shots that we are getting from Beijing. China all ready to celebrate 70 years of communist rule.
Start of its future. People from all walks of life, from 56 ethnic minority and ethnic groups all over China will be on hand to witness history unfolding. The ceremony is about to begin. You're watching China Global Television Network, bringing the live broadcast of the National Day celebrations in Beijing.
There you can see the Chinese citizens waving flags and waiting for the massive military parade, which will be beginning soon, and President Xi will also address the country. And the main point of these events is to show that China has stood up, grown richer, and become stronger over the past decades.
Now, members of China's top leadership are entering the Tiananmen rostrum. We can see President Xi Jinping, Premier Li Keqiang, and other members of the Politburo Standing Committee of the CPC Central Committee. Former Presidents Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao are also attending the ceremony.
Various government institutions, including the State Council, the National People's Congress, the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, the Central Military Commission, have also sent delegates. In addition, representatives from all of China's 56 ethnic groups, compatriots from Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan, and overseas Chinese are also present. On either side of Tiananmen, in the grandstands, are those who have been honored for exemplary work in their fields, representatives of students who study abroad, foreign diplomats, and foreigners who have worked for a long time in China. Now, national leaders and former leaders all line up on Tiananmen rostrum, and they will be inspecting the parade.
Now, I would like to announce the celebration for the 70th anniversary of the founding of People's Republic of China begins. Please all rise. Fire the salute guns.
Soldiers is walking from the monument to the people's heroes to the flagpole. The monument is dedicated to the men and women who toiled, sweated, bled, and often made the ultimate sacrifice for the founding of this country. Audience members are standing for a special salute. 56 cannons, representing China's 56 ethnic groups, are being fired 70 times to mark the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China.
Euro salute for national celebration is 28 guns, and that number represents the difficult and glorious course from the founding of the party in 1921 to the founding of New China in 1949. And on the 35th, 40th, and 45th National Days, 28 guns were fired. And 50 guns were fired on the 50th anniversary. And 60 guns were fired on the 60s. For the military parade on September the 3rd, 2015, 70 guns were fired. That is the most of any previous celebrations and commemorations. It marked the 70th anniversary of China's victory in the war of resistance against Japanese aggression during the Second World War.
Now raise the national flag and sing the national anthem. Please be seated. Now let's invite the General Secretary of the CPC Central Committee, President, and Chairman of the Central Military Commission, Comrade Xi Jinping, to deliver an important speech. My fellow countrymen, comrades, friends, today we are gathered here to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. At this moment, people of all ethnic groups in China and Chinese men and women all over the world are filled with great joy and happiness, proud of this great country, and sending good wishes to our great motherland. Here, on behalf of the CPC Central Committee, the National People's Congress, the State Council, the CPTCC, and the Central Military Commission, let me express my deepest tribute to the revolutionary heroes and martyrs for their immortal contribution to national independence, people's liberation, the building of the nation, and the well-being of the people. Let me congratulate people of all ethnic groups and patriotic Chinese all across the globe. Let me also extend My sincere gratitude to friends of all nations who have cared for and supported China's development. It was today 70 years ago that Chairman Mao stood at this very place and announced solemnly to the world the founding of the People's Republic of China, which marks the end of more than 100 years of humiliation and misery the country had suffered since modern times. The Chinese people managed to stand up on their feet and embark on a grand journey of national rejuvenation.
70年来
Over 70 years, the Chinese have been united as one people, and through hard work and perseverance, we have scored unparalleled achievements. Today, a socialist China is standing in the east of the world, and there is no force that can shake the foundation of this great nation. No force can stop the Chinese people and the Chinese nation forging ahead.
Comrades, friends, forging ahead, we will remain committed to the leadership of the Communist Party of China, put people first, stay true to the socialist path with Chinese characteristics, comprehensively follow through the basic theoretics, guidelines, and strategies, meet people's aspiration for a better life, and engage in new and historic endeavors. Forging ahead, we must remain committed to the strategy of peaceful reunification and one country, two systems. We will maintain long-term prosperity and stability of Hong Kong and Macau, advance the peaceful development of cross-strait relations, unite the whole country, and continue to strive for the complete unification of our country. Forging ahead, we must remain committed to the path of peaceful development, uphold the open strategy of win-win cooperation, and continue to join hands with all the peoples in the world to build a community of a shared future for mankind. The People's Liberation Army of China and the People's Armed Police Force will forever retain the characters, purposes, and the nature of being the people's military. They will resolutely safeguard the sovereignty, security, and development interests of the nation and resolutely protect world peace. Comrades, friends, China yesterday is already engraved in the history of mankind. China today is created by hundreds of millions of hardworking Chinese, and China tomorrow will be even more prosperous. The party, the army, and the people of all ethnic groups must be more firmly united. Remain true to our original aspiration and keep our mission firmly in mind. We must continue to consolidate and develop this People's Republic and continue our struggle to achieve the 2 centenary goals and to realize the Chinese dream of national rejuvenation. Long live the great People's Republic of China. Long live the great Communist Party of China. And long live the great Chinese people.
Now the military review starts. On your positions.
First up, the pace setters. Now you can see 60 soldiers marching towards their designated spots. They help mark areas where the parade will take place.
Central Military Commission, which commands the military. The Commander-in-Chief is now in his special red flag limousine.
Mr. President, the military is assembled in order and ready for your review. Chief Commander of the Military Review, Yi Xiaoguang, proceed.
Going to be a new special ceremony. Xi Jinping will pay his respects to the party flag, the national flag, and the military flag.
们辛苦了！同志们好！同志们辛苦了！同志们好！同志们辛苦了！同志们好！同志们辛苦了！
Military Commission, Xi Jinping is now returning to Tiananmen. And we will hear slogans being chanted on strengthening the military. As we can see, some of China's most advanced weapons will be on display, are being displayed.
As we mentioned earlier, the President is also the chairman of Central Military Commission.
have it, China's lavish display of its military might at the Tiananmen Square, taking place as the country celebrates its 70th anniversary of Communist Party rule on the 1st of October today. For more details, let's also go across to our correspondent Patrick Falk, who's joining us live from Beijing. Let me welcome Patrick. Patrick, a very good morning to you. This indeed is a major celebration, as we can see. It's important for you to run our viewers, especially our Indian viewers and all our viewers abroad. How significant is this celebration for China?
Yeah, well, I think the lavish word you used, the word lavish you used a moment ago, is absolutely suitable. This is an enormous celebration for China. It's an occasion when the country is marking 70 years since the founding of the People's Republic, and we will be hearing throughout the course of the day much about China's achievements over the last 70 years, particularly in the last few decades, the more recent decades, when the Chinese economy has opened up and really developed to be an economic superpower. But beyond that, we're also, of course, seeing China's military might today. There are 280,000 people, rather, involved in the preparations today. And what we're seeing now is the military inspection involving 30,000 military personnel. We are told that President Xi will be inspecting 48 ground troop squadrons, as well as a dozen airborne troop squadrons. And this is very important for the president. Indeed, it's been said that the modernization of China's military has been one of the key achievements of presidency. That's involved, in fact, the reduction of about 300,000 troops to make the Chinese military more nimble. But also, of course, it's about the modernization of its hardware. So we are seeing a lot of that on display today. 580 pieces of military equipment, and the thing that people are really going to be focusing on is some of the nuclear capabilities that China has on display. In particular, its intercontinental ballistic missiles, as well as airborne and seaborne capabilities. In a July defence white paper that was issued, the country stressed the goal of maintaining security through nuclear deterrence. China has at the same time said that this is not just simply an aggressive show of force that's on display here today, but it's also very much about demonstrating the modernization of its military. But certainly the equipment on show will naturally act as a deterrent for a lot of threats facing China.
Right. It's interesting that you mentioned that this military might, which has been put on display today, is also to actually display its might because of those deterrents that are challenging China. I'm going to actually bring you to speak about these challenges at the moment, because you just rightly mentioned how this has been about displaying those latest additions to its military inventory, including those aircraft, the ballistic missile and that supersonic drone. But let's talk about those challenges that are currently facing China at the moment, because the protests in Hong Kong are already casting a shadow, not to forget the trade war that China is involved in when it comes to the United States, and of course the millions that have been detained in those detention camps in Xinjiang. There is much that is already casting a shadow over China at this moment.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. And what's happening in Hong Kong really is in stark contrast to the events taking place here in Beijing. A lot of people here won't be focusing on that because this is a day of celebrations for them, and they don't want it to be overshadowed by the criticism that's coming from Hong Kong at Beijing. But, when we talk about the headwinds that China faces, we do talk about the trade war. We talk about the economic headwinds that China is facing. It's experiencing its lowest rate of growth in nearly 30 years, and of course what's happening in Hong Kong. But as China has mentioned before, it has no intention of imposing itself on other countries. It's not about spreading its hegemony, and so to an extent, when we talk about its defences, it is very much about consolidating China's own sovereign territory, what it sees as its own sovereign territory. But that does, of course, include Hong Kong and Taiwan as well, two areas which have not perhaps been brought into the fold that China would like to.
Right. Patrick, I'll request you to just hang in there as we have some more visuals coming in of the military parade that's taking place at the Tiananmen Square. Some of the best visuals on display. Let's have our viewers have a look.
Military's band plays. They're waiting for the commander-in-chief to ascend the Tiananmen.
Commander-in-Chief Xi Jinping has inspected the troops.
And this is Xi's first National Day military parade as China's president. There have been other occasions. One was the September the 3rd China Victory Day parade in 2015. It marked the 70th anniversary of the victory of the Chinese People's War of Resistance against Japanese aggression and the end of the Second World War. Another first was foreign troops back then. Most of them were China's allies during the war. At that parade, Xi Jinping announced a troop cut of 300,000, saying China would continue to take the path of peaceful development.
And another parade was 2 years ago on July 30th at the Zhurih training base in North China's Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region. That one marked the 90th anniversary of the People's Liberation Army. Zhurih is China's most advanced training base. The parade came after Xi Jinping called for breakthroughs in reform of the armed forces. It showed the profound reforms the PLA had been undergoing, such as its newly created forces, the Rocket Force and strategic
Patrick,
support.
going by the commentary that I'm getting in from Tiananmen Square at the moment, it's interesting how there are comparisons and parallels being drawn with this parade and the Victory Day parade back in 2015. It's not every day that you get to see such visuals where China has actually displayed its military might.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm told that there have been 14 parades of this kind that have taken place since 1949. But of course, this is a landmark year, 70 years of Chinese rule. And significantly, that makes it the second longest serving party in any country behind North Korea's Workers' Party. It also means that it's outlasted the Soviet Union, which only lasted for 69 years. China is, of course, acutely aware of some of the challenges that it faces, and President Xi Jinping himself has said that power is not guaranteed forever, and that they will need to keep on tinkering with policy and keep developing in order to continue seeing the rise of China, if you like. And it very much sees stability and development as going hand in hand. So this military might that we're seeing is also very much about that stability, and something that China holds very dearly, partly because of its history of really being a fragmented country prior to 1949. And it is seen by many people here that the Communist Party has been able to hold the country together.
Absolutely. And Patrick, for all our Indian viewers, I'd actually request you to run us through what exactly happened 70 years ago, because today is a historic day which marks 70 years of the communist rule back in China. So what exactly happened 70 years ago? It's important for you to just jog our memories back into history.
Yeah, well, that's right. 70 years ago was the founding of the People's Republic of China. So President Mao Zedong would have been standing in some of the same areas that President Xi is addressing the nation as President Xi is today. And that's what took place after the end of the Civil War, after the communists battled with the Kuomintang, which were pushed to Taiwan, if you like. The Kuomintang, of course, a key political party that still exists in Taiwan, of course. So we have seen over the last 70 years China develop a great deal. It's gone from an absolutely poverty-stricken nation to the opening up under Deng Xiaoping over the last 30 years to develop into becoming a real economic powerhouse.
Absolutely. In fact, just referring back to a historical anecdote, we're being told that when Mao Zedong actually announced the establishment of the communist rule back in 1949 on October 1st, they had to request their fighter jets to take 2 rounds because their air force was completely in shambles. The country was in a battered condition. So how would you actually draw that contrast of a China at a time when there was Mao Zedong and now at a China which belongs to Xi Jinping?
Well, that's a really interesting comparison that you make there. And, if we're talking about China 70 years ago, it was a fragmented country, one that it feels was targeted or suffered a lot of injustice at the hands of Western powers. A lot of people here would say, and it's something that's referred to repeatedly, particularly over the last couple of weeks. But, when you talk about aircraft at that time needing to make 2 rounds, there certainly won't be any scenario of that kind happening today. We've got 580 pieces of military equipment on show. There are 30,000 military personnel involved and 100,000 people involved in the parade itself. So, I think we're going to get a real good glimpse of just how powerful China's military is today. And that will, as I say, be a deterrent to other countries that may be a threat to China.
Absolutely. The numbers speak for themselves. As you just mentioned, this is one of the strongest armies that we are looking at, apart from the United States or the Russia. This is one of the strongest militaries in the world that we can see. And Patrick, important to talk about how Xi Jinping as a leader has spent years in consolidating his grip on power, and now he holds more authority than perhaps any Chinese leader since Mao himself. How would you analyze the leadership of Xi Jinping?
Well, I think a key point is when President Xi scrapped the presidential limits, meaning that he could stay on for some time. It's hard to say how long he will maintain control. He is facing challenges externally and internally as well, partly because of things like the economy, things like what's happening in Hong Kong. But he is indeed the most powerful leader, certainly since Mao Zedong. He keeps a very tight grip over the country, and what's happening today is an indication of that. The security across Beijing has been incredibly tight over the last week. It's been quite difficult getting around. Some of the streets have been blocked off. There's security personnel around all the streets here, and it has been a little bit difficult for people getting around their day-to-day business, but a lot of people will see that as being worthwhile. They are immensely proud here of the country's achievements, and as I say, today is very much about the celebrations.
Right, we are going to draw that contrast between the people of Beijing, how they're feeling right now, and, of course, the people in Hong Kong. For now, let's also dip in to those visuals that are coming in from Tiananmen Square. It's not every day that you get to see a military parade with such a lavish display. Let's have a look at these visuals coming in.
PLA has 5 professional service branches: Ground Force, Navy, Air Force, Rocket Force, and Strategic Support Force.
Next up, the Leader Commander Division. It is led by Major Generals Jiang Guoping and Chen Zhosong. There are also 27 generals and 325 majors and lieutenants from the Central Military Commission organ system, 5 theater commands, and armed police. Their mission is to showcase the new vitality of the military commands after structural reforms and clear direction for the policy of training commanders before training soldiers.
Up next is the Pla Ground Force, led by Major Generals Lin Xiangyang and Tang Xinhua. The ground force traces its origins to 1927. It's the largest and oldest branch of the armed forces, serving as the military wing of the PLA. It's been charged with the strategic requirement of mobile operations and multidimensional offense and defense. That means raising its capabilities for precise, multidimensional, and sustainable operations.
See the PLA Navy leading the team, Rear Admiral Zhou Mingwei and Liang Xu. Its original mission was to protect territorial waters and support island combat. Over the years, the Navy has expanded its mission to
Let's quickly go across to Patrick for more on the PLA. Patrick, if you can hear me, the PLA is, of course, one of the strongest armies that we're talking about in the world. Important to talk about, what the PLA consists of, those 5 professional service branches. You must tell our viewers more about the PLA and how vast it is.
Is the Air Force led by Major Generals Jing Tao and Zhao Yungyuan.
Well, as I mentioned, part of the modernization that President Xi has enforced is actually the reduction in the size of troops. It got cut down by about 300,000 people in 2015, but it is still, of course, a massive, massive military force with 2 million personnel in total. And China's defense has been second only to the US. And, of course, it is, as the second largest economy in the world, a very important military power as well, and it is no doubt likely to continue to grow. Part of the modernization over the last few years has been, as I say, reducing the number of troops on the ground, but it's very much about moving into the area of cyber warfare. That has been a key focus for military defenses, not just in China but in other countries as well. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what's been going on this morning in this parade.
Right.
We understand there's been a team that's flown past with a banner in the sky, and 2 comrades from the war of resistance against Japanese aggression ride past. 11 teams on foot, 17 foreign military teams, and 27 teams with equipment, we're told.
All right, so that's quite a bit. That's happened. But on a last closing note, what I'd like to ask you, Patrick, before I let you go, is to summarize the speech of Xi Jinping. This is one of those historical moments that everybody's been anticipating. And what is it that Xi Jinping had to convey to the Chinese people?
Well, I haven't had a chance to listen in on the speech yet myself, but no doubt President Xi would have spoken a lot about the achievements of China over the last 70 years, and also about those headwinds that we've talked about facing the economic challenges and the trade war. And perhaps there may have been a bit of a mention on Hong Kong as well. As you said earlier, what's happening there is in stark contrast with the celebrations taking place here today. But, it's not going to not water down the events that are taking place here. There's a lot of people out on the streets waving flags, dressed in red. This is a huge day for them, and of course the start of a golden week holiday for a lot of people here. So after today, we are expecting Beijing to clear out a little bit, when a lot of people will be returning to their hometowns for that holiday week, and it could be quite quiet here over the next 7 days. All
right, so beginning of a holiday week for the Chinese, and certainly a stark contrast with what's happening in Hong Kong. Rather ironic. On one hand, you have a sense of pride and excitement in the country. On the other hand, if you look at the autonomous territory of Hong Kong, the people who are angry, the violent protests taking place. But for now, thank you so much, Patrick Falk, for bringing us all those live updates from Beijing and giving us a sense of everything that's happening at Tiananmen Square.
There were 352 soldiers from different service organizations, armed police and troops. Chinese women can be seen on the front line of fighting disasters, hard points in every aspect of the armed forces.
Now comes the Researchers Division, led by Major Generals Yi Shuqiang and Wen Fuxin. They come from military institutes, the National University of Defense Technology, PLA Academy of Military Science, and PLA National Defense University. The division cultivates military talents in its mission to advance the strategy of strengthening the Army through science and technology.
Next up, the Civilians Personnel Division, led by Wang Haitao and Wang Huayan. Military reform has called for the recruitment of outstanding talents across different fields. They apply their specialized knowledge and experience.
Up next is the Military Reserve Division, led by Senior Colonel Gao Xinjiang and Reservist Senior Colonel Xu Zhendang. The reserve is a key component of China's national defense. The reserve conducts regular training to drive its reform, promoting integrated development of reserve and active forces.
This is the Militia Division, led by Zhao Bingqing and Liao Weiwei. The militia comprises female soldiers from different fields in Beijing. They are a very vital complementary force to the Army, receiving regular training to maintain their combat capabilities.
Coming up is the formation representing China's UN peacekeepers. They are led by Major Generals Xu Youze and Ma Baochuan. China contributes the most troops among the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. There are over 2,500 Chinese serving in 7 mission fields, 8,000 on reserve duty. 13 Chinese peacekeepers have died in foreign lands. The sounds of heavy vehicles tell us the arms and equipment formations are coming. 40% of the armaments will be shown to the public for the first time. We will see 32 formations.
This is the Flag Guard formation. They're representative from renowned and elite forces leading the formation. General Liu Yuejun, Lieutenant General Wang Jianwu, General Zhao Zongqi, Lieutenant General Li Qiaoming, and General Zhu Shengling. They are the main commanders from the Army's 5 theater commands, and the flag shows the heroism of the soldiers during different periods of their fight for the national interests. Under these flags, the party and people fought together to gain independence and a new republic.
Now here come the ground formations. Leading the tank formation is Major General Li Ming. There are 22 99A tanks, the main battlefield tanks independently developed by China. They have advanced firepower ability and defense capability.
Is the light armed vehicles led by Major Generals Huang Zhewang and Wang Yunsheng. The 04A tracked IFVs and 15 light tanks are highly mechanized. Their ability to respond rapidly to potential threats has them on the front line of emergency land battles.
Following is the amphibious fighting vehicle formation, led by Rear Admiral Zhu Tuansheng and Sha Chenglu. The 05A amphibious fighting armored vehicle is used for land operations, offshore sailing, and beach attacks.
This is the airborne fighting vehicle formation led by Major Generals Qiu Huo.
All right, let's quickly go across to Einar Tangen, who's political and economic commentator, and he's joining us live from Beijing at this hour. A very good morning to you, Einar. This indeed is a historical moment, what China and the world is witnessing through its lavish display of its military might. How significant is this 70th anniversary for China? You must run us through the bit of history also that follows this day.
Well, it's very important. Obviously, this is the founding of the new China in 1949. It came after a very intense civil war. The Communist Party was successful, and they ushered in 30 years of reform under Mao. Unfortunately, it didn't quite turn out the way they expected, and it took Deng Xiaoping, the leader following Mao, to really kind of reset things, be more pragmatic. He ushered in a period of unbelievable economic prosperity, which has continued through to today. So it's not without tears that they're celebrating. They understood there was tremendous sacrifice that was made. You know, for China, like India, there were a period of kind of domination by colonial interests. They call it the 100 years of humiliation, starting in 1841 with the seizure of Hong Kong and other lands by the British as part of the First Opium War. And since that period, China has kind of resolved, as has India, to kind of find its own way in the world.
Right. And now going back to 1949, when Mao Zedong announced the establishment of People's Republic of China, how do you view the China of Mao Zedong back then compared to a China of Xi Jinping today?
Well, obviously quite different. I mean, back then there was this kind of ideological struggle between communist socialism and democratic capitalism. The Qing Empire had, in essence, collapsed years earlier. A republic had been created, but there were two different views of how that republic should be developed. Obviously, Chiang Kai-shek had his view and Mao has his. Now, Mao won in the end because he had the trust of the people. He certainly didn't have the tanks and artillery and Air Force that Chiang Kai-shek did, but he was able in the end to rout the Kuomintang and get them moved over to Taiwan. From that period forward, it was really about trying to manage. Being a revolutionary is one thing. Being an administrator is another. So there was some rough periods in China's history, but Mao will be remembered and is remembered today as a person who, as a person within the party together, who freed China from what they saw as this 100 years of humiliation.
Absolutely. Mao is still remembered, which is why we still have Xi Jinping also invoking Mao in his speech. But, you know, as one of the world's largest militaries, also with one of the largest military budgets, how do you just talk us through the PLA and its 5 service branches that the PLA has? You must tell us more about the People's Liberation Army.
Well, the People's Liberation Army today is quite different from prior to Xi coming along. It's been drastically reorganized. The PLA at one time, they had factories. They were involved in everything from making cigarettes to alcohol to chemicals, you name it. They were involved, even in terms of land speculation and building properties. That is not the case anymore. Now you see a military, they took away all of these insignias, you know, Third Army, Fourth Army, all of this thing. And they have basically reorganized the whole thing so that it is more responsive to civilian control of the party. But also they've decreased the numbers down. I mean, the numbers have gone down steadily. Now, part of this reorganization is they created this kind of defense force and the rocket force. And these are, you know, kind of strategic weapons, or let us say not weapons, but they have strategic weapons in them. This is kind of just the way that for some reason they wanted to organize it. They wanted this separate rocket brigade. This is really the main line of China's deterrent against kind of any kind of invasion ever happening again.
Right, and new weapons have been put on display this time, including a hypersonic drone or an intercontinental ballistic missile. But do you see the economic slowdown that's plaguing China at the moment hitting the defense budget of the country?
Well, they're still investing, but it's a little bit different than it used to be. It used to be there was a lot of bodies on the payroll. Now they seem to be more focused on technological development, upgrading the military and things like that. In terms of the economy, yes, it's slowed down a bit. It's not where it is, but as you know, when something is growing, there's what we call a regression to the mean. You can't grow at 10% forever because you would literally soak up the volume of the universe. So as you grow larger, the amount you grow is still small. For
Right, there seems to be some technical glitch with INR. We will try and reconnect with Mr. Tangen in just a bit. For now, those are the latest visuals that we are bringing to you. Today is indeed a historical day, not just for the history of China, but for entire world history, as the world views this as a spectacle, as the display of China's military might. Some lavish visuals coming in there. Important to note that just a while ago, China's President Xi Jinping promised to maintain stability in Hong Kong. This was the first point that he made in his speech. He kicked off the celebrations of the 70 years of Communist Party rule by emphasizing on national unity at a time of unrest in Hong Kong. And to precisely translate what Xi Jinping had to say, he said that no power can stop the progress of the Chinese people and the Chinese nation. Let me get back to Einar Tangen, who's joining me again, live from Beijing. Einar, you must go ahead and complete what you were saying.
In terms of the military, yes. There has been a slowdown, but as I said, it's a regression to the mean. When you're the second largest economy, you're not going to grow the same way you were when you were the 50th largest economy. And obviously that will continue. There's just no way to do it mathematically to get beyond 10% a year forever. So what you see in terms of what people would call a slowdown, they're in essence adding an economy the size of all of Australia's to their economy every single year. So they're still doing pretty well. Their numbers are doing better than people expected, given the kind of trade war situation they're in. But in terms of military expenditure, the problem is that with the rest of the world spending more and more on guns and rockets, it's probable that China will, in essence, try to keep pace.
Right. Einar, also something that's, a stark contrast at the moment is what's happening in Hong Kong. On one hand, if you look at China, there's a sense of pride and excitement on ground zero with the people who are all preparing for a week-long holiday. On the other hand, what's happening in Hong Kong is just anger on the streets. There's chaos, there's anger, and there are protests, of course. How do you view this contrast at the moment?
Well, it's a real shame. I mean, the fact is that Hong Kong isn't going anywhere, and the likelihood that they will become an independent, democratic state is probably less than me growing wings and flying to the moon. China feels very proprietary. As I said, in 1841, the century of humiliation started with Hong Kong being forcibly taken by the British as part of the First Opium War. So, they see it as part of one China. Now, obviously, there are people in Hong Kong who feel very differently. But if you start tracking down a lot why they feel this, resentment towards the mainland, you'll find most of it has to do with the economic policies of the people who've, in essence, controlled Hong Kong for these many years. And those are the 100 top families. They prevented new housing from being built, which means, in essence, that the housing and properties that they own continue to go up in value. But for the average person working there, the probability of them being able to own a house is very, very slim. Their wages are too low for them to really have any hope of having a normal life. So, yes, it's not surprising that they feel ill-used, but I don't think it's the policies of mainland China. Hong Kong has enjoyed a tremendous amount of freedom and is in the top 1, 2, or 3 areas in the world where those who keep statistics say that it is the most free and easygoing city and friendly to business.
Right.
So
Einar, it's important to also talk about the fact how, these protests that are taking place in Hong Kong are also reminiscent of what happened back in 1989 when China was celebrating its 40th anniversary of the communist rule, which were very muted celebrations back then, because even back then the pro-democracy protesters had been killed. And this is almost being today, what's happening on the 70th anniversary is almost reminiscent of that day.
Well, people try to draw parallels between Tiananmen and Hong Kong. I don't know that it's necessarily the same. In Hong Kong, it's not just the radical students who are doing the violent protests, but you see everyday people who are joining in on the peaceful protests. There's real gap between how people perceive themselves prior to Hong Kong being reunited with China. If you asked most people, they were about 65 to 70% would say we are Chinese. Today, if you went to Hong Kong, I think you would probably be 90% plus people would say that they're Hong Kongese. So they've developed a sense of identity that was kind of conferred to them by the British. Now remember, the British did not give universal suffrage to Hong Kong. They started it in just 3 years before the turnover. And in essence, the basic laws, this is the kind of agreement, the one country, two systems, was set up by the British. And it seems now that people are dissatisfied with that. They say they don't like that. They want to have a free, independent, democratic Hong Kong, but it's just not possible.
Right. It's not possible, but don't you think that hasn't Hong Kong dared to question Xi Jinping's authoritarianism, and where do you see Hong Kong go from here on?
Well, you're assuming that your question assumes that he is an authoritarian. I mean, yes, he is a central leader as part of a one-party system. So you can say that he thinks, but within the party itself, there's a tremendous amount of debate that goes on. The issue there is once a decision has been made, people are expected to follow the discipline of agreeing to it or not disagreeing with it in public. It's the only way that they can see going forward. Every country has their own system. China, I don't think, has preached to anybody that people must follow the Chinese way or the communist way. Quite the opposite. They've been very pointed about saying that China has a very unique system, very unique circumstances, and what works for China may not work for others. So going forward, I think China is trying to follow its own path, as India is following its own path.
All right, it's interesting that you mentioned that China is following its own path. That brings me to my next question. You know, the Soviet Union, which was once a supporter and sponsor of China, almost converted the entire nation into a communist regime. If you look at China, China has managed to outlive the Soviet Union. How come China has managed to not have the same fate that the Soviet Union had, which failed miserably?
Well, I put that down really to the reforms that were brought in by Deng Xiaoping. I mean, prior to that, if you looked in Russia or in China under Mao, people would talk about the, proletarian workers' paradise. This was the aim of, socialism and communism, where communism was going to speed up this transition to this ultimate nirvana. But in actuality, both were ill-prepared. The 5-year plans that they had developed at that time were too rigid. They didn't take into account human nature and the need to stimulate people to do things. Deng Xiaoping changed that. He said to farmers, it says, grow your quota and everything after that is yours. All of a sudden, from not having enough food, there was a surplus of food that was being generated in China, and he understood that. He brought in words. He gave up the socialist workers' paradise talk and started talking about black cat, white cat. Who cares what color it is as long as it catches mice? He talked about crossing the river by feeling the stones. There's a very, very different sea change and how you start describing your country and your goals. This was talk that was very accessible to farmers, to anybody within the society. So that pragmatic tone, which is really kind of dominated until today, and will probably go forward.
Absolutely. And when you look at everything that China is today, there's one central personality to everything that China has, and that is Xi Jinping. Important for you to run us through how, this one man, Xi Jinping, became central to China's destiny.
Well, you have to know a little bit about how party leaders are picked. I mean, it's kind of like a corporate culture in the sense that you have to prove yourself all the way up. You have to avoid scandals. You have to handle all the affairs you're involved in. You have to make friends, allies, and have people believe that you deserve a chance at the top. Now, he was put in that position. I think a lot of people were surprised subsequently just how strong he was and what kind of vision he was going to bring. I mean, his crackdown on corruption, every leader coming in would talk about a crackdown on corruption, and maybe there'd be a few people who would be rounded up and, they would be set as examples. But under Xi Jinping, he said he was going to do it, and he really has. People now say, oh my gosh, it just seems like it's going to go on forever. But, corruption in government is something that, there's different tolerances in different countries and cultures. But within China, it's poison. It prevents the government, which has sole authority, from doing what it's supposed to do, which is working for the people. And along with that, he also took out the corruption within the military, made sure that they were being military men, not businessmen disguised as military men.
Right. Einar, how would you analyze Xi Jinping's speech today? He, of course, spoke about consolidating Hong Kong. It was a rather powerful speech where he emphasized China's new strength as well. How would you analyze?
Well, it was 6 minutes, fairly short. I think he was very clear that he's looking for a world which is win-win, multilateral, sustainable, all of these things, all the same words that we've heard before. It's always incremental with these speeches. I mean, there was not that much new. He's renewed his talk about poverty and all the social things that have to happen to make a more balanced society. But he's also interested in the world. Remember, we are at an inflection point. You have one power that says that, you should make yourself great again. Doesn't matter how, that it's a zero-sum game. And then you have Xi Jinping who says, no, it should be multilateral and it should be win-win. So at some point, countries in the world have to make a decision about which way benefits them. Is it better to have the law of the jungle or to have a semblance of international comity and consensus that brings about more peace?
All right. Einar, as the 70th celebrations of the communist rule take place today in China, there's much that is already casting a long shadow. And that, of course, one of them being Hong Kong, the other is the trade war that China is engaged with the U.S. And, of course, let's not forget, it's the detention of the millions in Xinjiang, which has also drawn much international condemnation. How do you view the new age challenges that China is facing at the moment?
Well, China's in a difficult situation. Economically, obviously, the trade war weighs heavily. They've been able to do a little bit better than the U.S. Right now, the U.S. numbers are trending more downwards. The production is down, manufacturing is down, investment is down, consumer spending is now dipping down. They had a negative quarter of growth in the manufacturing area, first time in 6 years. And if that continues, it would seem that the U.S. is on track for a recession, along with the rest of the world. In terms of where China is going with this, economically, they have challenges. They also have this issue about global governance. How should that be arranged? And these are all things. In terms of Hong Kong, yes, it is an issue for them. It's a bit embarrassing. But you'll note that they've acted with restraint. They have not sent in the military forces, which would be very easy to do. They have these bridges and things like that. There could be, literally tens, hundreds of thousands of troops in there in no time. And they said, no, it's one country, two systems. We will rely on the Hong Kong police to manage things. But that could change if bodies start appearing on the ground, whether they're police or protesters. This could ignite something where the national security comes into play. And then they would be forced to do something, probably at the instigation of the Hong Kong authorities. In terms of Xinjiang, now, this is a very difficult thing. And India has experiences with Kashmir. You have a situation where you believe there's trouble. You try to do what is necessary. Invariably, there's people who condemn it. But the question is, if you did nothing, and the public, acknowledge that you did nothing and trouble comes, then you're in a very difficult situation. Your government will fall, and in essence, you have derogated your duty to protect your country, to provide a safe place. So, yes, these are challenges. How governments meet them is another issue that will be judged by history. But they are trying to make sure that they don't have a group that is wedded towards this idea of separatism or religious extremism.
Right. And our last but not the least, the other challenge I see that is that China is currently facing, of course, is the environment. Air pollution being one major concern. I can see most of the publications are strewn with the fact that today's celebrations are taking place with the smog hanging across the city. What do you have to say about that?
Yes, there hasn't been any wind for the last couple of days. Last week it was beautiful blue sunny skies and a very gentle wind that seemed to blow things away. But if you look at Beijing, as you know, in India, it's easier to say get rid of pollution than actually do it. But Beijing has actually climbed out of the bottom 200 cities in terms of pollution, PMI, all of these things. So they are trying. They've done radical things. They've shut down factories, said that they have to have more environmental safety catches and scrubbers, all of the things that will make the air things. They have a vigorous planting campaign. They've produced more trees. I think China has planted more trees than the rest of the world combined over the last 20 to 30 years. So they're trying to do what they can. There are always parts which they don't. I mean, they still have a reliance on coal. Part of that is strategic because of the situation with oil supplies and the cost. It's something India knows very well also. And it's just part of the struggles of being what is still a emerging nation like India, trying to find your way on that delicate path between economic expansion and the environment.
Absolutely. And as an Indian, I can relate to every bit of what you just said. And certainly China is doing much. I hope that's enough as far as the environmental concerns are there in China. I hope they are being addressed sufficiently. But now, thank you so much, Einar Tangen, for bringing us all those details and putting things into perspective as China celebrates its 70th anniversary of the communist rule. Thank you so much for joining us.
Giant bird in Chinese mythology. This is due to its long-range capability, tremendous carrying capacity, and